acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As we were just chatting about, this is an exciting week for the National Growth Areas Alliance and for all those politicians who are going to hear all this fantastic evidence and all of the recommendations that we've pulled together out of the wonderful work that we're very privileged to have RMIT, or the Australian Urban Observatory, and Western Sydney University doing for us. So I would like to just outline today, we'll hear about the livability scorecards, we'll hear about international best practice, and then Anne Herney and I will run you through where we've taken all of that information and combined it with your priorities as member councils, combined it with what we know is happening politically and from a policy and program perspective, and how we've whittled that down into still a very comprehensive document, but hopefully just 3 recommendations that will capture attention. So we'll then hear, we'll just run through some of the logistics for the event on Thursday. Michelle will update us on media arrangements. And then anyone who's on the call but not able to make it to Canberra will make you jealous with those details. So firstly, I would like to, and perhaps it could be useful if just in the chat, if you could just outline which council you're from, so that Nikki and Marianne from Western Sydney University and Melanie and Annette from RMIT can just get a sense of who's on the call. So first off, we're going to hear about the livability scorecards, which Professor Melanie Deverne from the Australian Urban Observatory has led, and she will be represented in Canberra next week by Dr. Annette Crone, who you will all know because she's done a fair bit of work for NGAA in the past. So, Mel, I will hand over to you to talk us through the livability scorecards.
Yes, thank you very much, Bronwyn. And yes, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Annette, who will be coming up with you on Thursday. I would love to be there, but I had committed myself to go and talk to the Vietnamese government at Vietnam's campus overseas, so I miss out. It's not a bad excuse. Like, I was nearly considering, can I get back in time? Can I swap? No, I can't do it. But these scorecards we developed with the Australian Urban Observatory. For anyone who doesn't know, we measure and map livability across the 21 largest cities of Australia. And we started back in 2020, and we have a digital livability planning platform that encourages people to get in and see what livability looks like, both at the sort of broader local government area level through to the detailed suburban neighbourhood level. But we wanted to make this really available to people, and actually began with the Department of Infrastructure, who are very interested in the city level results. Now, as an AUO, we're not so interested in the city level results because we actually want to look at inequity in livability over cities, so that we can talk about where it would be better to invest in the future to improve livability for everyone, which is a really nice segue to this work, because in talking with Anne and with Bronwyn, we were sort of talking about how we might be able to construct a new scorecard that would focus on the differences between the growth areas and existing areas of Melbourne. And so we've looked at both non-growth areas, we've looked at growth areas, and we've looked at the whole city result, but then also produce maps at the suburb level across those, highlighting the growth areas. So we're really trying to support the advocacy work of the NGAA and showcase some evidence to show that, yes, we know things like walkability is much better in the centre of all of our capital cities. All 21 of our cities actually have better walkability, because of things of the way we plan, where those destinations are, how we've designed those cities. And we're trying to just make this easy to understand in a scorecard. So you don't have to go into the portal, you don't have to be an expert. The beauty of using a map is that everybody can understand a picture, and it holds a lot of information that can be shared with people in a really easy to digest way. And that was the purpose behind the scorecards as they originally were developed, and for this purpose as well. So it really is a starting point to support the advocacy action to improve the growth areas. And it is nice to say that there are some aspects of growth areas planning that is looking better than other areas of the city. So it's not all negative, but we want to show change. Well, we want to see change, and we need to have the evidence out there to really create that conversation. It's much harder to ignore people when you've got, and in the words of Mary Agostino from from Mitchellshire, it's about taking evidence to use it to whinge properly, to whinge loudly. So evidence into really appropriate action, and that's what we're really trying to do. So that's a short summary, Bronwyn. I'm not sure if you want me to talk longer or if that's enough for now.
No, that's enough for now. Do we have something to show just to give an indication of what it will all look like on Thursday?
I can show something. Would you like me to?
Or Melanie? Yep.
Sorry, because
I was just scrambling for the email. Sorry about that. Yeah, if you've got
because deadlines are great, aren't they? We're really cutting them fine this week.
Absolutely.
There we go.
So here we go. I'll just show you. So just moving through, this is kind of like the report looks like. So we start with our front cover. We talk a bit about what's in here. And this is the most interesting aspect too, in terms of what we've really focused on in these scorecard reports. So we do have the overall livability index, which I would say is maybe the least informative for action in terms of our indicators, but it is very useful for attracting attention. So it is in there and shows that there's not a great difference often. But things like housing affordability, walkability for transport, frequent public transport, public open space, and then a real focus on social infrastructure in this scorecard. So we start with the overall social infrastructure index and then focus in on the subdomains that make up that index. So these are health infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, education infrastructure, and community and sport infrastructure. So the subdomains of that overall index. And then on each page, we basically sort of have the rationale for why we should be interested in this particular indicator, and then how it was measured with the result. So we're still tweaking in bits on these, but in terms of what we have put through, and we just want this to be really clear. This is not a detailed research report. Remember, it's high level, capture the audience quickly, let them get the understanding. So we say things like the livability index score for residents in growth areas of Melbourne is 96. This livability index score is lower than the Melbourne City average of 99 and non-growth areas of Melbourne where the average is 100. So livability is scored a little bit like an IQ score. So 100 is average. It can go up to 120 or down to 80. We force it within those limitations. So anything below 100 is below average livability. So we're really trying to make that point. And really 100 is what we should be seeing across most of our cities because we're forcing them to fit within this kind of distribution. And then we have a map down below on each of these indicators, highlighting the growth areas across Melbourne. And then you can see that's actually calculated at suburb level. The simple understanding, green is good, red is bad. And you can see that there are areas across Melbourne, particularly across the growth areas, where you can see there's a green pattern on the inner areas and a redder pattern on the outer areas. But there are pockets. And I think that's really important to note, that there are suburbs. It's not terrible everywhere either, and there is variation across them. So this is the bit that we want to say as a general, when we kind of put all of those growth area suburbs together, we do get this kind of result. But when we're able to pull them out into details, you can see there are areas doing better and worse across the whole of the city. So there's a general pattern and then there's specific patterns. And it's really kind of being able to have that conversation as we go through. And then we go all the way through each of the different indicators. We get to the bottom, we've only got 10 indicators. We find that people just won't read, really, once it gets over that. They're sort of a bit tired of the whole thing. So we know we have to keep them short. And then we have a summary page, and we'll have this for each city, where we're actually comparing between growth areas. And I can see a typo already in my last page, but don't worry, I'll fix it. Difference between growth and non-growth areas. And then we're basically saying, are they better or worse? And so only for two, like this is an example for Melbourne, we can see that they're similar with a black dot. They're worse with an arrow down. They're better with an arrow up. And as mentioned earlier, you can see that public open space, large public open space, is actually better in growth areas than these other non-growth areas. But the general trend is we're trying to say that a lot of them, they're doing worse on these factors. So we're making that call. And we're using a 10% difference. So we're not going with statistically significant. We're not going into that conversation. We're just saying if there's a 10% difference or more, it's defined as better or worse. And if there's not a 10% difference, then we're just saying it's similar to those areas. So again, it's very much about the communication of how do we say this and make it easy to understand, but provide some really powerful information. Any questions on those?
Thanks, Mel. Can I just say the work that's gone into this is different from what you'll find in the scorecards for the capital cities in general. And a lot of extra work has gone into this to be able to prize apart those social infrastructure categories, subdomains, because they are the things that from the members' priorities we know where councils A, have some influence over what gets built, and B, are advocating for those facilities for their communities in the priorities. So the extra work in trying to prize that apart hopefully will be beneficial from members' point of view in terms of being able to say we can see more clearly what needs to be done where. And we know, for instance, the sporting and community infrastructure was particularly different than in the growth areas compared to other areas. And that also came through in member priorities, particularly for the members in Perth and also in Melbourne for key sporting and community facilities. So I'm hoping that this really, gives the evidence for you to be able to use, and paints the picture for it, in a really strong way. So I appreciate all the extra work that it has taken to actually unpack rather than just duplicate what was in the capital city scorecards.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I can see the question from Pauline saying, is there a definition with the scale scope and that 100 is below average as 96 doesn't sound like an issue? I guess the idea of these scorecards too is that they're an adjunct to the AUO. So there is a metadata page of the AUO. It says what we measure and describes all of the detail. So any questions about, well, what does this mean? How did you do this in detail? We encourage people to go back to the Australian Urban Observatory and click on that page, because this is the difference between being a full research report versus a scorecard, which is that snapshot, easy to understand. So for people to go back, otherwise you end up having pages of text and it's just a completely different field. So that if you have any questions about any of this, or anyone asks you questions, I would encourage them to go to those pages and go to the digital portal itself and look at the detail.
And I also point out that the scorecards are very similar to what we're all familiar with the CIFA index, in the sense that it's relative. So, 96 might sound like, I'd be happy with a mark of 96, but I think in this case, it's relative to, it's relative, and that's why we've sought to identify the local government areas of the growth areas compared to the other local government areas, because visually you can sort of see a difference, but we just actually wanted to capture to what degree is that difference, and having that 10% difference is a really good marker of knowing what degree of difference where growth areas experience compared to the inner areas. So just keep it in mind there, it's all relative, everything's relative.
Yes, and that's a good reason. There'll be questions at some point about walkability. We've never put a walkability score into these scorecards because it's too complicated to explain to people who aren't statistically familiar. I have to go into talking about the distribution and Z scores, and like people just sign off or don't listen or don't understand. So rather than put an odd score like this is minus 1.2 and the rest of Melbourne is rated at 1, it gets confusing because it's decimal points. And the way that we calculate it is actually based on the distribution and where one area sits in the distribution to another, that relativity that Anne's just mentioned. So we just go with, look at the map. It's much easier than trying to explain. You'll have a 15-minute conversation about how we created the score, rather than the point of, look where walkability is good and look where walkability is not so great.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Melanie and your team. Thanks, Anne, for guiding this. I think you will see that we've created these scorecards that will fully support both our advocacy and your individual council's advocacy. So I'd certainly encourage you, if you're not already subscribers to the Australian Urban Observatory, to have a look into it, because it's incredibly valuable. And just incredibly valuable. So thank you very much, Melanie, and we look forward to catching up with Annette in Canberra, and I think these are going to be really popular. So thank you again.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm sure it will go well. I hope you get lots of attention to be able to talk about these important issues.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right.
Well, now we'll now go. No, that was Anne. We'll now hear from Professor Nikki Morrison, who is from Western Sydney University. Let me just it's the Centre. Sorry.
Urban Transformation
Centre. So Nikki and Marianne Strickling have worked very hard on this international best practice literature review for us to provide some context to policymakers and politicians around why we're putting forward the particular proposal we are. So thanks, Nikki. I'll hand over to you.
And Anne suggested that I actually make this forum. I've written it as a speech, which I'm going to deliver on Thursday.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's quite good to do that. I'm actually standing up even, because I know I'll be standing up on Thursday, which is quite difficult for a whole hour. But I think it's quite useful to do it. And then actually what I'd like most is your feedback that I've hit the mark.
Perfect.
So,
yep.
Because I've presented, this is the third time I've talked to National Growth Area Alliance members. And so I've given the presentation, I've talked through each of the different countries, I've talked about what we've done. But now I think it's a chance just to turn it into hard-hitting recommendations, which I know you can talk on. I haven't even shared this with Anne, so I think I may be going too hard, but we'll see. But I think it's a good opportunity to do it as this type of presentation. So because we're launching the report there, and I think complementing what Melanie is saying, you've done the scorecard, you're painting the picture, whereas what we're doing is trying to direct the government future directions to avoid some of these scenarios that you're painting. And so our report is addressing a critical challenge facing Australia's outer metropolitan growth areas, and that is infrastructure funding. And these rapidly expanding regions, they've got vibrant communities, you all know, and great potential, but they're also among the most resource constrained, as you're all feeling, and struggling to secure investments needed to support growth and improve livability, which Melanie's talking about. And so what we've been doing is examining Australia's significant funding and governance challenges, but also we're very much offering practical evidence-based solutions. And we've done this by drawing on very successful international models from countries like the UK, the Netherlands, Germany now, Annette, the US and Canada. And we're demonstrating how place-based integrated infrastructure funding frameworks can be adapted to Australia's unique context. And these examples highlight the need for strategies which very much face our outer metropolitan areas, balancing population growth, housing demands, alongside environmental sustainability, but also critically community resilience. And it's been widely acknowledged, which we focus in our report, that Australia's current infrastructure funding system is fragmented, reactive, and poorly coordinated. And investment decisions are being made on an ad hoc project by project basis without that strategic national framework. And that's leading to inefficiencies and service gaps. And political cycles are worsening these issues, with short-term priorities often overshadowing long-term needs. And that's leaving critical projects you're all having underfunded or not even being realized. But also added to this is that reliance on grant funding, that competitive nature of grant funding further disadvantages our rapidly growing metropolitan councils who are struggling to compete with our well-resourced urban centres, and that's been well documented. Over-reliance on grants exacerbates this and leaves our high-growth areas, all of you, with congested roads, limited healthcare and education access, and lower overall livability, which has been highlighted in those scorecards. And we want to say that both sides of Parliament and state governments and the advisory bodies like Infrastructure Australia, who we've been interviewing, recognise these challenges. Yet the efforts to address that infrastructure backlog in outer metropolitan areas remains insufficient. So what our report has done, it aims to bridge that gap. And as I said, it's offering very actionable insights from international best practice. And through our research, and this is our summary, which Anne hasn't heard yet, or Bronwyn or Michelle, is that we're highlighting 6 key lessons from global infrastructure funding and governance models, which we're saying that Australia can adapt and must adapt to meet some of these challenges. So the first one is long-term sustainable funding frameworks. That's a cornerstone of effective infrastructure delivery. So countries like Canada and even the US offer multiple year funding program. Canada's Investing in Canada plan allocates over 180 billion over 12 years. And the US, its Community Development Block Grant program, has supported communities for decades. And these frameworks provide that certainty. It allows you, local governments, to plan and deliver projects aligned with long-term community growth strategies, rather than being vulnerable to shifts in political priorities. And we know that Australia has a current 4 to 5 year budget cycles. And we know that Labor government has proposed its 10-year infrastructure plans. But what we're suggesting is it's failing to provide that long-term stability needed for sustained growth. And what we're suggesting and what is required is bipartisan commitment to multi-decade funding frameworks to ensure that stable and predictable investment pipeline. And this will allow you, your outer metropolitan growth areas, to plan proactively, align infrastructure with projected population growth, rather than always reacting to delays. And such an approach would future-proof infrastructure delivery and promote that forward-thinking development. Second, Sustainability must be a core driver of investment. Sustainability isn't an afterthought. It's a cornerstone of future-ready infrastructure strategies. In all the 5 countries we studied, environmental and social sustainability are integrated alongside economic development as a fundamental aspect of infrastructure planning. For example, the Netherlands Infrastructure and Spatial Planning Fund prioritizes ecological balance. Canada's national funding framework places strong emphasis on green infrastructure. Germany's federal programs gives equal weight to green and social infrastructure. By embedding sustainability into their funding criteria, these nations effectively address climate risks, reduce long-term costs, and foster healthy and more resilient communities. In contrast, Australia is lagging behind with an inconsistent approach to sustainable infrastructure planning and delivery. While the federal government has started factoring greenhouse gas emissions into project evaluations, it continues to overlook critical issues like biodiversity and long-term climate resilience. And we must embed these principles at every stage of planning and delivering of our infrastructure, not just as a goal, but as a necessity to meet climate commitments and protect community well-being. And these challenges are particularly pressing for you, our outer metropolitan growth areas, where you're facing rapid infrastructure development and limited resources, making sustainable infrastructure delivery even more crucial. Third is collaboration, right across government levels and sectors. That's essential for successful infrastructure delivery. And countries like Germany and Netherlands have been praised for fostering integrated approaches that ensure alignment across federal, state, and local governments, as well as cross sectors. Public-private partnerships, such as the UK's local enterprise partnerships, have demonstrated the power of collaboration with industry as well in driving local economic development. And in Australia, it's well recognised that siloed thinking and misaligned priorities between government levels are major barriers to progress. Local councils, which you're facing, are well deeply connected to their communities, but you lack the authority and resources to act. And state governance structures frequently leave you powerless to implement infrastructure plans. To address this, we need legislative reforms and much stronger leadership from the government or government. That's essential. Rather than simply providing guidelines, as in the National Urban Policy, the Commonwealth must take a much more assertive role, ensuring accountability and driving a much more unified approach. A national framework for collaboration would empower councils to align projects with national objectives and address that current lack of coordination. And fourth, successful infrastructure programs globally prioritize place-based, community-driven approaches, giving local governments the power to address their unique needs with flexible, targeted funding. And all the 5 countries we've looked at all recognise placemaking. It's absolutely essential, and they can tailor investments to local challenges you're facing, like population growth and housing needs. Placemaking, we know, enhances connectivity and quality of life, and this links nicely to Melanie's work too, especially in our fast-growing urban areas. And while the current Australian government has included social infrastructure such as schools, hospitals and community centres into its national urban policy, there is still no consistent national framework for valuing it. A place-based approach is key, and you've got to address both social and physical infrastructure from the outset. Without integrating both, communities face delays in essential services, and that diminishes livability, as those scorecards are showing. And in our outer metropolitan areas, and we know these illustrations, people often move into places before critical services are available. And these delays cause unnecessary hardship for our residents, and they hinder the development of sustainable, livable communities. And fifth is robust evaluation and accountability. That's crucial. So 5 countries we've studied, they all invest in infrastructure, but importantly, they also invest in rigorously evaluating their projects They regularly assess outcomes, measure impacts, and importantly, they hold stakeholders accountable. So Canada's invested in Canada Plan, the Netherlands Infrastructure and Spatial Planning Fund. They have strong frameworks to ensure efficiency. Germany's program, they set benchmark sustainability, economic impact, and inclusivity. They have longitudinal studies to track sustainability and impact of projects over time. And we're suggesting that Australia must adopt similar systems. And the government has recognised the need for post-completion reviews in the 2022 Independent Review of Infrastructure Australia. But it's also been acknowledged by many and Infrastructure Australia that these reviews are not consistently done by jurisdiction, nor are they're rarely published. And so we're suggesting that we need a nationally consistent approach to evaluation to ensure projects meet their goals, operate efficiently, but crucially, foster community trust. Evaluation is not just a bureaucratic process, it's a strategic tool for continuous improvement. And 6, and finally, a call to action. Adopting international best practices is not about copying solutions, but tailoring proven strategies to Australia's unique needs. And this requires legislative reform, bipartisan commitment, and a willingness to rethink acknowledged, entrenched processes. Business as usual is not good enough. By prioritizing long-term funding stability, devoid of political cycles, sustainability, collaboration, true collaboration across government levels, and place-based community-driven approaches, we can build that resilient, thriving outer metropolitan regions that drive economic growth, but critically, as those scorecards are saying, improve the quality of life and also promote environmental stewardship. So now is a critical moment for both parties, because I'm presenting this on the Thursday, that's where it's coming from, to unite and empower you lot, I'm presenting now to you guys, the local councils, to plan and deliver infrastructure needed to unlock the potential of our outer metropolitan areas. And this will help a more equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. And why do we do all this? For our communities. All right, so that was me doing the spiel. And I recognize quite a few of the people, because this, although we've done the systematic literature review, 104 references on a very short, tight framework as our nose, we've actually done another project on green infrastructure. So we're interviewing a lot of people I can see online. So that's a lot about the Western Sydney, but the same things happen. And then just before we did this, because I hate speaking to someone, I actually also interviewed Infrastructure Australia too on Friday. So me too, Melanie, I've been working at the weekend. But I just wanted to say that Infrastructure Australia have seen what I've written, and I wanted to make damn well sure that they don't mind me saying some of this. I actually had put some of the, the Livability Infrastructure Fund about the Liberals, I put some political stuff in, but I decided to take it out. But I just want to make sure that people are on page with this message. And if it's strong enough, or whether I can make it stronger, and hopefully it aligns with what then, well, I think Ron goes first, then it will be RMIT, then I come later, and then we've got the two Labour and Liberals.
Thanks, Nikki. That was great, and I loved the structure of it, and I think it will tie together very well.
Yeah. I've seen your piece too, so I don't want to override you, but it sort of comes from the work as well.
Exactly, and I think it's important at this moment in time, when we are waiting for the National Urban Policy to be released, to have this international context.
Yeah, and also, by the way, as you know, when I presented 2 other times to the members, I also always want to say, because I've spoken to my American colleagues and I've spoken to my British colleagues and even the Netherlands, I want to say that they also are critical of their own systems. So I don't want to always over-project how brilliant they are, but there's nuggets in there which are better than us. So it's not a case of, oh, these are all successful, follow. And I've toned it a little bit, so it's not all about how great they are, but there are elements of those programs which is remarkable that we're not doing. So, and when I spoke to Infrastructure Australia on Friday, they reaffirmed that, yeah, we're lacking that, we've got this inconsistent framework, and they weren't bashing the jurisdictions, but the state, but they were saying there's some real issues here. So
Yeah.
they're mentioning it. They don't mind this being said.
Yeah. Wonderful.
And everyone's acknowledging it. And we've done that literature review of
We
what's
keep
going on.
saying it over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. And business as usual isn't good enough. So, but I've also been told that when the media take you on, that they will do a negative framing. So you mustn't start to bash the different parties. So I promise I won't. And if I've taken some of that out, so I think you're not to, like, for example, the Liberals scrapping.
No, bashy.
Well, putting on hold the National Construction Code, I've got very strong arguments on that, being a housing academic as well. But I'm not going to, I'll just say why the National Construction Code is fundamental. But I won't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Melanie, you had a question there.
Yeah, Nikki, that's brilliant. Fantastic. And I just thought if you get in there just a couple times, just mention health, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the bit we forget to talk. So this is why I put in the comment down there that just the simple way that I would describe livability, instead, even without saying the social determinants, I just say it's the connection between urban planning and health. And just to get the implications, right, that if somebody is traveling an hour and a half every day because that's where they need to get to, then these have health implications. Like we don't have that conversation about what about physical activity? How do you do this when you have to travel so far to get to something? So just if you pop it in there a couple times, that would be great.
Actually, you and I work on so many different grants related to health and urban planning. No, I agree. Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much, Nikki. That's going to be a great publication that we'll be distributing, as well as a great presentation. So really looking forward to that. And if please put in the comments there if anyone has any other feedback. But yeah, really looking forward to it. So thanks, Nikki, for pulling and Marianne for pulling all this together so quickly.
Credit to Gina. She's not here, nor is she coming to come, but she's been absolutely fundamental too, my other researcher.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, well, we'll move on now to an overview of what we have done internally to then bring together some recommendations. We started with a long list and just over iteration after iteration, we've brought it down into 3. And the purpose of the paper that Anne's been working on is it's sort of the middle ground, so that we will then be able to present this quite detailed paper to the politicians. We will also have a summary brochure. We'll have the scorecards. We'll have Nikki the WSU paper. We'll have enough there for the media to take deep dives where they want to, and we'll go into media interest in a minute. But what we've done is build on all of the work that we've already been doing for the past 12, 13, 14 years. And so hopefully none of you should be particularly surprised by anything that's in here, but we now have some really significant additional evidence to put into it. So I will share my screen, and I won't run you through the full thing because it is quite extensive, but we will be able to share a copy of it. We've got another couple of proofs to do, and then we'll be able to share it with the members in advance of the Thursday event. So when we were looking at sort of the title of this paper, we realised that we want policies and programs and funding to be aimed at providing equity, so equitable access to infrastructure. When we know from our livability scorecards, we have a deficit in a whole range of different types of infrastructure. And we wanted to put it in the context of the biggest political issues at the moment, which is housing and around, the economy, I suppose, and infrastructure funding, and how we can place ourselves within the political context and rhetoric at the moment. So we've gone with from deficit to equity. So you can expect to hear that phrase a lot over coming weeks. This is quite a lengthy document. So just to make things a little bit easier, I will just quickly talk you through the contents page and then the executive summary. So all of our demographic data is in there. We've got, we've looked closely, or Anne's done deep dives into ABS categories, into other regional and spatial categories that different parts of Australia are put into. And we've created that context of how important growth areas are, both for housing, for the economy, and that sort of intersection between rural and metro and regional areas. And we've made a very strong case as to why we're different. So that leads us to, so we've looked at how they're nationally significant, using the language of Infrastructure Australia to say infrastructure projects must have national significance, while growth areas are. We've gone into the population growth rates. We've looked at the geographic location of growth areas. We've looked at what makes them different, so land use and greenfield development. We've looked at the economy and productivity, and we've made them the mainstay of housing supply, which brought us to the first of three recommendations. And this is sort of the foundation one, I suppose, that we need to be recognised as a distinct region. So you will all know from writing grant applications that a lot of the thriving suburbs or urban precincts or regional partnerships, all these programs use ABS, greater capital city statistical areas. And quite often, as Melanie's work has shown, cities as a whole are lumped into one in terms of access to funding or funding programs. So we've made a very strong case to separate out growth areas because they are in such a different situation. And we've provided, a couple of bit of the reasoning there. So the different rates of population growth, the historical and the projected rates of population growth, the greenfield development. We've looked at each state and what their response to the housing accord is. We can all talk about infill targets till the cows come home, but having said that, there are still hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new homes that will be built in growth areas over the next 10 to 20 years. So firstly, we need to be recognised. Secondly, we need to fix the deficit. So we're saying we're not going to say, give us $20 billion, that'll fix it. We're going to say within existing programs, once you recognise and designate a stream of funding to growth areas, existing programs will work better. And at the right time, we'll suggest that they might need to be their budget might need to be increased by a particular amount. But basically, we're saying let's not reinvent the wheel. Existing programs can work if we have that recognition. Just like, in the Thriving Suburbs program, for the first time, some of those low rate-based councils were acknowledged, but there are only a handful of ones that are growth areas. So we need to expand that and have a stream of funding within existing programs for growth areas. So in there, we've put in the reasoning why, and it's about transport congestion and distance to work. So all of our members who have transport-related projects, they sort of slot in very nicely under that reasoning. And then we talk about Melanie's work on the livability. So they're all of our members who have project priorities related to social infrastructure slot in very well with the reasoning there. So, yeah, we're really saying use what we've got, but do it better and give us a particular weighting or a stream within existing programs. We've also included in there some of the coalition's policy announcements to sort of suggest how that could work if there was to be a change of government at the next election. And Anne, please jump in any time that you would like. And so then our final recommendation is about equity. So recommendation 2 is about fixing the deficit. Recommendation 3 is about reaching equity or striving for equity. So this is where, with Nikki's and her team's work, we've Anne has has put together a national infrastructure investment framework. And that's where, the magic happens. So I'll just quickly show you then. So recommendation 1, the executive summary. You can see there we've made the case, how we're different, and how greenfield development is the key to future housing. Recommendation 2, we've got sort of in the lighter purple, we've got the reasonings behind it, and then in the green, a couple of implementation suggestions. So augmenting existing, and then sequencing and collaborating on new funding streams for growth areas. So that's the deficit one. And then recommendation 3, so we talk about the place-based investment, which we've Anne's looked through a number of existing government programs. Another reason is it's community driven. So we've done a bit of work looking at all of your community plans, and we love those councils who say we engage this exact number of people, because then we could do a chart. So that was fantastic, and then we've got this framework. So I will just quickly flick down to the framework and show it. It's comprehensive.
So this is where by drawing on some of those key elements that Nikki was talking about in other programs, the A, the longevity, the B, the collaboration, and being able to, within one program, prioritise key areas that require attention, and for it to be place-based. The framework draws pretty much heavily, almost identically, to what is in place now for regional areas. And that's why the significance of recognising growth areas as their own distinct regions. We can then apply the same principles in terms of, bringing local government into that discussion of what are the priorities for your areas. And given that we've collected from you the range of priorities that you've suggested, and we talked previously about sort of categories of infrastructure, like the sport and community infrastructure, like the public transport, like the precincts work, like the and then the roads packages as packages. Building those as the priority categories, and then working with councils to identify the what and where and how in terms of the delivery, and also then following that up with the evaluation, and also not just of the projects themselves, but of the programs that they come under. Because if we're not, and this is where it sort of circles back to the sort of work that Mel has done, which looks at, well, what is the distribution of the access to infrastructure? We can apply that same thinking to what is the what outcomes are we achieving by funding different types of infrastructure or investing in centres. We should be able to see those outcomes in terms of health outcomes, in terms of employment outcomes, in terms of economic outcomes, and indeed in terms of environmental outcomes. And that's kind of where we want to get to in thinking about it more holistically, as opposed to, wow, we've got a pot of money here for the thriving suburbs, let's go and apply for that project. And then we've got another pot of money over here for housing support. Well, everybody runs over there and applies for that money. And then what we end up with is sort of like basically the smattering of distribution of infrastructure that comes up like there's lots of pink and green, but more pink in both areas and more green in the inner areas. And we know that, like from Western Sydney, for example, with the cultural and arts funding, that they found when they actually sat down and looked at where does the funding go, they only found 5% of all of the state's cultural funding was going to Western Sydney's, you know, and the rest was sort of basically inner city, and then leapfrogged out to the regions. So, and we know that this gets repeated over and over. So what we're trying to argue here is just a more comprehensive approach to infrastructure funding that is basically place-based, but also relies on sort of a more structured needs assessment, which is, you know, why the livability scorecards is so important in that work, and why we can point to international examples where this has been going on for years, decades, in fact, in terms of the US example goes back to the 1970s. And so these are across political cycles but very much focused on what are the community needs based from community engagement. So I think having those two things together and then putting it forward in terms of, well, you know, if it's, this is me talking and it's not official, but if it's good enough for the inner regional areas, it's good enough for growth areas, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Anne. And this is just a fantastic future-focused recommendation. We've got catching up to do, but as we go through to implementation of the Housing Accord, this is really something that we'll be pushing, and I think it will fit in quite well with the National Urban Policy as well. So thank you. And I know that's just a very quick sort of run through, but we will, as I said, make a few more tweaks to this document and then share it on the members page of our website so that you can all access that and download it. We'll talk very quickly about logistics for the event. Michelle, did you want to jump in here? And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. So you can see that the research is amazing, and so we want to make sure that the event on Thursday is really doing justice to the information that we're going to be sharing. And so in the lead up to Thursday, Bron and our interim chair, Meretrice Alliance, have been doing a whole lot of meetings with politicians. As we've been sharing in our fortnightly advocacy meetings, we've had a lot of relations with both sides of government, which has been really, really positive. And the outcomes of those meetings have also helped to inform and shape how we message, how we put together our key messages. And so for Thursday, we're excited that we're going to not only have strong media attention, but we're also going to have strong government. We're going to have some federal members there as well. So yes, speaking of media, we're also really excited to share. We've been working with the Impact Institute. They're our public relations agency, and they've been pitching out to various media outlets over the last fortnight. And the goal is really to gain as much coverage of the event and the research as possible. And so we're really excited to share with you the following have been confirmed as attending the event. So we've got ABC News TV, the afternoon briefing. They'll be there to present. They'll cover the key highlights. Channel 7 News, National News, they'll be there with a camera. So, that'll be exciting. The Mandarin, so the Mandarin's known for its, public sector insights. It's an online platform. Sky News will be doing a post-event interview. We've just had confirmation of 9 Radio, and so they're the owners of 2GB, 3AW. They're going to provide news grabs nationwide, but then also an interview with Bron will be going on in its entirety, will be going on to their Breaking Politics podcast. Those have been locked in. We've also received interest from the likes of AAP and Australian Community Media, and these are key outlets that provide broad syndication. So that's really positive. The Guardian have also expressed interest, as well as the Herald Sun. So we're going to continue with our media outreach this week. But as you can see, what we've done so far, we're ensuring a really broad and impactful coverage across all forms of media, so television, print and digital, which is really exciting. And so at the event as well, switching gears again, going back to the political representation. So the Honourable Christy McBain will be speaking at the event. We're also still lining up, so we're still in conversations with various members. And then following the event, mayors and councillors will be invited to attend special briefings, and one of them will be with the Honourable Catherine King, who's the Minister for Infrastructure. So these are really, really positive conversations to be having, making sure that our research and our recommendations are getting in front of key policymakers. Following that, we'll be having lunch at Old Parliament House. So I apologise for people on the call who won't be attending. Your support will be with us in spirit. But if you're not sure if anyone from your council is attending, please reach out to me. I'm having some technical issues and I'm not able to receive any emails. So I will send out I can send, but please feel free to give me a call and I'm happy to share with you who from your council is attending. If you need any further help trying to get people to come, happy to do what I can. Accommodation might be an issue, but that's okay. That's a bridge we can cross when we come to it. But if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Also, to post the event, we'll be aiming to share with members our key messages for media. So if you're wanting to leverage some of the media coverage that we're having, we'll also try to help you with that as well. I think I've covered everything, Bron.
Thanks, Michelle. That's great. Yes. And so, yeah, we've provided all of the sort of logistical details to people who've registered. And my only suggestion would be make sure you're on time, make sure you're there early because it's a very, very busy day in Canberra and Parliament House. So parking, etc., will be at a premium. Stephen and then Megan.
Thanks, Bron, and thanks, MJ, and thank you to you all. I know it's a bit early in the piece, but post-event?
Post-event, yes.
We're going on holiday.
Until February, March? Was that the plan?
No. So what we're going to be doing in the afternoon at Parliament House is working with the members there to sort of provide our work plan for the next several months because we're still working towards a May election. There's still been no word other than a March budget, which would mean a May election. And so we'll be working on that timeline, which means that really Thursday, as we've called it, is the launch. It is the launch. So the political engagement will continue unabated. I'll be back in Canberra the week after, for example. There's a speech on housing. So it's really in that afternoon workshop after the event, we will be working with people in the room to find dates and locations and hosts for state-based events early next year. We'll be providing advice on and seeking advice from members about how we can support your local advocacy on local issues and vice versa. So it really is a really important deadline for us to get all of this research done and our thoughts together so that we then run with it all. Yeah. Megan, did you have a question there as well?
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. And thanks all. I can feel the pace that must have happened over the weekend with a whole lot of people online. I need to provide briefing ideally today, if not tomorrow upwards. It would be very helpful if there was some, you talked, Michelle, just then about key messages getting packaged up, etc. I haven't felt comfortable to provide a whole lot and I haven't had access to a whole lot as yet. So I'm wondering if you are able to send us, dot points or whatever that we can use to brief up so that our staff and mayors and delegates attending are able to stay on point and aligned with the messaging that you're wanting to put out.
Absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great. A summary, not you know, you're all busy. Just dot points in an email is absolutely fine. I can craft them into our own, you know, format or whatever for briefing. So don't, you know, spend ages or anything, but some level of consistency, I think, and just general pointers would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to dash to the next
That's
meeting.
okay.
Bye.
That's all right.
Good
Thank
luck.
you.
No,
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Good luck
Thanks.
as well.
Okay. Yes, we can. Yeah, that's a good point, Melanie. Thank you. All right, it is 2:02. People have meetings to go to. If there are no other questions, thank you all for listening in. Oh, sorry, Nikki. Yep.
I mean, only because last time when we presented to the members, we made a call out because we want to say all the existing problems, and we don't want to name councils, but we were hoping that you could sort of, anyone who wants to give us any extra information about what you're facing, because we're doing another project. I've got a lot of the Western Sydney councils. I don't want to use the sound bites. I'm not going to use it in the talk, as you see. I'm not going to change that. But I think it's really good if you can do illustrative sort of. It just increases it. We only had one or two in the end respond to that question, but Anne said later we'll go again on this, because it really is important to get the voice out there properly, and it's not just anecdotal sound bites, it's actually evidence. This links to another project I'm doing on green infrastructure funding, but I just if anyone's got anything they want us to quickly say, I've already spoken a lot to all these councils in Western Sydney, but just do share it with us.
Yep.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, I know Wollondilly very well.
Thanks, Stephen.
And yes, we're all around if you need anything more, and we will be sharing a lot of information with you in the next 48 hours and before. All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Kate,
you.
Melanie.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks.